She sat in her wheelchair by the window every afternoon, the way she had for 22 months after the stroke, and she pointed. Not randomly. Not with the unfocused agitation that the doctors had warned me about in the early weeks, the confusion that sometimes settles into a damaged brain like weather. With purpose. With the specific, frustrated insistence of a woman who knows exactly what she is saying and cannot make the words come out correctly, pointing at the filing cabinet in the corner of my study with her left hand, her good hand, the one the stroke had left intact, and looking at me with eyes that were entirely, painfully, completely her. I said, the way I said it every time, "It's okay, Claire. Everything's fine." She shook her head. She pointed again. Her mouth moved with the effort of words that wouldn't form, the aphasia turning everything she needed to say into silence. I took her hand. I said, "Let's go sit in the garden." She let me lead her away from the filing cabinet. But she looked back at it over her shoulder as I wheeled her toward the door. She did that for 7 months. 7 months of pointing at the cabinet in my study. 7 months of me telling her everything was fine. 7 months of taking her hand and redirecting her toward the garden or the television or the dinner I had made, because the neurologist had said that post-stroke patients often develop fixations on ordinary objects and that the best response was gentle redirection rather than reinforcing the behavior. Gentle redirection. 8 months after Claire died, I found what was in the filing cabinet. Not inside the cabinet. Behind it. Tucked into the narrow gap between the cabinet and the wall, where it had been placed deliberately, where it would not have been found unless someone moved the heavy oak cabinet entirely, which I did, on a Thursday afternoon in September, because I was reorganizing the study and had decided I wanted the cabinet on the opposite wall. Behind the cabinet was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting on it was the handwriting of a woman who had lost the use of her right hand to a stroke and who had spent 22 months learning to write again with her left, producing the specific shaky, determined script that I knew better than any other writing in the world. 2 words, and an arrow pointing down. Maria Files. I stood in my study holding my dead wife's note and I understood, for the first time, what she had been trying to tell me for 7 months from her wheelchair by the window. She had not been confused. She had been screaming. Subscribe to the Steady Father. Because what I found when I opened those files is the story of a woman who could not form words and still found a way to tell the truth. And what I did when I found it is the story of what a retired federal judge does when he realizes that the most important witness to a 15-year fraud was his own wife, pointing from a wheelchair, and he had told her everything was fine. Claire Brennan, née Holloway, had been a civil rights attorney for 38 years before she retired, and she had been the most formidably honest person I had ever known for all 67 years of her life. She had been honest in the specific, unsentimental way of someone who had spent her career watching what comfortable lies cost, in courtrooms, in communities, in the lives of people who had been told everything was fine when everything was not fine. She had been my wife for 41 years. She had also been, throughout those 41 years, the person whose judgment I trusted most completely, because her judgment was not optimistic or pessimistic but simply accurate, applied with the consistent attention of a woman who had decided early in her professional life that the truth was the most useful thing available and that providing it honestly was the most valuable service a person could offer. She was the one who had hired Maria. I want to be precise about this, not because it changes anything about what Maria did, but because it is relevant to understanding what Claire eventually saw that I did not. Claire had hired Maria Delgado in 2008, when our children were grown and we were both still working and the house had become large enough to require help we did not have time to provide. She had interviewed 3 candidates and had chosen Maria specifically, not the cheapest candidate or the most experienced, but the one who had answered Claire's questions with the specific directness that Claire valued above almost any other quality in people. She had told me, the evening after hiring Maria, "She's straightforward. I don't get the sense she's managing me." I had said, "That's a good quality in a housekeeper." She had said, "It's a good quality in anyone." For 15 years, Maria Delgado cleaned our house 3 days a week, managed the household accounts with access we gave her for routine bill payments, and was, in the language we used with our children and our friends, part of the family. She remembered birthdays. She brought food when we were ill. She stayed late without complaint when we asked, and she was, by every visible measure, exactly the person she appeared to be. Then Claire had her stroke, in January of 2021, and the visible measures stopped being sufficient. The stroke happened on a Wednesday morning, which I know with the precision of a man who has spent his career in rooms where the specific facts matter. I was in my study working on a consulting project. Claire was in the kitchen making coffee. I heard the sound of the mug hitting the floor and I stood up and walked to the kitchen and found her. She was conscious. This was the thing the doctors would later tell me was the important fact about the first hours, that she had remained conscious throughout, which meant the damage was significant but not the worst it could have been. The left hemisphere had taken the brunt of it, which meant the right side of her body and which meant, for a woman who had spent 38 years building arguments in precise, layered language, the most devastating possible target. The language was gone. Not entirely, not permanently. The neurologist was careful about false certainty in both directions, but immediately and substantially. She could understand everything. She could not reliably produce the words she understood. The medical term was expressive aphasia, and the specific cruelty of it, which I sat with for the 22 months of her survival after the stroke, was that she was entirely herself inside the language she could not reach. Her eyes told you this. Her eyes were completely Claire, entirely present, perceiving and responding and reaching toward communication with the full intelligence that the stroke had not touched, while the mechanism of expression had been rendered unreliable in ways that improved slowly and then stopped improving. She could say some things. Single words, sometimes. Fragments. Names occasionally. My name, clearly, from the beginning. The children's names. Maria's name, for a time, until something changed about the way she said it. A change I noticed and did not act on and that I have thought about every day since. Maria took on additional hours after the stroke. This was natural and necessary. Claire required consistent in-home care during the day while I managed the medical appointments and the physical therapy schedule and the specific administrative weight of a household reorganizing itself around a serious illness. Maria came 5 days a week instead of 3. She managed the household accounts with expanded access that I authorized in the specific fog of the early weeks, when authorizing things felt like doing something useful when so much else felt beyond my control. She was there. She was competent. She was kind to Claire in the observable ways, gentle, patient, responsive. Claire's physical therapist, a woman named Sarah Kwan who came 3 mornings a week, told me several times that Maria's presence was stabilizing for Claire, that familiar people in a familiar environment were genuinely important in post-stroke recovery. I believed this. I was grateful for it. I did not look at the accounts for 14 months. I want to tell you what I was doing during those 14 months, because context is not excuse but it is honesty, and honesty is what this story requires. I was doing what a husband does when his wife of 41 years has had a stroke and cannot tell him what she needs. I was learning. I was learning the specific medical vocabulary of post-stroke recovery, the difference between expressive and receptive aphasia, the significance of the type of hemorrhage, the timeline of recovery that was possible and the timeline that was not. I was learning the communication strategies that the speech therapist taught me, the picture boards, the yes and no questions, the specific patience of creating space for Claire's responses rather than filling the space with my own interpretations of what she might be trying to say. I was managing the medical appointments, the neurologist, the speech therapist, the physical therapist, the occupational therapist, the cardiac follow-up, the pharmacy management. I was managing the household that the stroke had reorganized entirely. I was managing my own grief, which was a specific and complicated grief because Claire was still there, entirely, furiously, painfully there, and the grief was not for her loss but for the distance the stroke had placed between us, the specific distance of 2 people who had communicated with complete fluency for 41 years suddenly separated by a barrier that effort could partially cross and could not fully remove. During those 14 months, I did not look at the accounts because Maria was managing them and because I trusted Maria and because looking at the accounts required a quality of attention I was spending entirely on Claire. I did not look at the property records because I had no reason to look at the property records. We owned 2 properties, the house where we lived and a small rental property across the city that Claire had purchased before we married and that had been generating steady rental income for 35 years. There was no reason to look at property records for properties I had no intention of selling or refinancing. I did not look at the signature line of the 3 documents that were filed with the county recorder's office during those 14 months, because I did not know they had been filed, because Maria had intercepted the correspondence, and because a woman sitting in a wheelchair by a window was pointing at the filing cabinet in my study and I was telling her everything was fine. She started pointing at the filing cabinet in March of 2022, 14 months after the stroke and 4 months after Maria had begun the property transfers. I did not know this timeline at the time. I know it now, because the filing dates are in the public record, and because the relationship between when the filings began and when Claire started pointing at the cabinet is not a coincidence. It is evidence. Claire Brennan had been a civil rights attorney for 38 years. She had spent those years reading documents in the specific, adversarial way of someone who understands that documents are not what they present themselves as and that the gap between what a document says and what it means is where the important information lives. She had read every financial document that passed through our house with the same quality of attention, not because she was suspicious but because she was Claire and careful attention was simply how she moved through the world. After the stroke, she could not read in the sustained way she had before. But she could look at documents. She could see when something was wrong in the way that a trained eye sees wrongness even when the mechanism for articulating the wrongness has been damaged. She could see Maria removing things from the filing cabinet and returning things to the filing cabinet on the days I was out of the house. I know this from the physical therapist, Sarah Kwan, who mentioned it to me later as something she had observed without understanding. She had seen something. She had understood something. And she had done the things available to her. She had tried to tell me, repeatedly, for 7 months, pointing at the cabinet with her good hand and saying with her eyes everything her mouth could not produce. And she had written a note. With her left hand, which she had been learning to use for 14 months with the specific painful determination of a woman who was not going to let the stroke take more from her than it had already taken. She had written 2 words and an arrow pointing down and she had placed the note behind the cabinet where it would not be accidentally moved or found until I moved the cabinet deliberately. She had given me what she could. She had been as precise as her damaged body permitted. And I had told her everything was fine. I will carry that for the rest of my life. Not as guilt that paralyzes, as a fact that I have made my peace with, slowly, in the specific way that you make peace with things that cannot be changed and that you would change if you could. I was doing what I knew how to do. She was doing what she knew how to do. And the gap between what she knew and what I understood was the gap that Maria Delgado had been counting on. I found the note on a Thursday afternoon in September, 8 months after Claire died in May. I had been reorganizing the study, not for any specific reason, not because something had prompted it, but in the ordinary way that a man who is living alone in a house that was built for 2 people begins to reorganize things. I wanted the filing cabinet on the opposite wall. I moved the desk. I moved the bookcase. I moved the cabinet. The folded piece of paper was on the floor behind it, against the baseboard. I picked it up. I unfolded it. Maria files. An arrow pointing down. I stood in the study for a long time. I have spent 43 years as a lawyer and a judge, and in those 43 years I have read documents that contained every variety of human truth, confessions, accusations, evidence of things people had done and things that had been done to them and things that existed between those 2 categories in the complicated territory where most human behavior actually lives. I have read documents that destroyed lives and documents that restored them and documents that were both of those things simultaneously. I have never read a document that cost me as much as 2 words written with a left hand on a piece of paper found behind a filing cabinet. She had known. She had been trying to tell me. I set the note down on the desk. I looked at the filing cabinet. I opened the top drawer and began to pull the files. What I found in the next 3 hours is what I am going to tell you now. I should explain something about my study's filing system, because it is relevant to understanding how what I found in the files was possible. I am a man who keeps records. Not obsessively, I am not a person who cannot throw anything away, but consistently, in the specific way of someone who has spent his career in rooms where the precise fact matters and who has therefore developed the habit of maintaining documentation for everything that might eventually need to be documented. Property records. Financial statements. Tax returns going back 30 years. Every significant transaction in the life of the house and the life of the marriage and the life of the finances, organized by year and category in the specific way that suits my mind. Maria had access to this filing system. She had access because I had given her access, because managing the household finances required access to the files that contained the account information and the bill records and the payment schedules that she needed to do her job correctly. She had access for 15 years. For the first 13 of those years, she had used it for exactly the purpose I had authorized. For the last 2, she had used it differently. What I found, pulling the files on that Thursday afternoon, was this. In the property records section, there were 2 documents I had not placed there and had not seen. Each was a notarized transfer document for the rental property across the city, the one Claire had purchased before we married, the one that had generated steady rental income for 35 years. The first document, dated 14 months earlier, transferred a 50% interest in the property to a company called Delgado Property Management LLC. The second document, dated 8 months later, transferred the remaining 50% interest to the same company. Both documents bore my signature. I had not signed either document. I had not been present for either notarization. I had no knowledge of either filing. I had not signed them. But the signatures looked like mine, in the specific way that a practiced imitation looks like the original, close enough to pass a casual review, slightly off in ways that a forensic examiner would be able to identify and that I, holding the documents and looking at my own signature replicated without my knowledge or consent, could already see. I pulled the financial account records next. The household accounts that Maria had been managing with the access I had authorized. I looked at 18 months of transactions and I found, the way you find these things when you know what to look for, a pattern of payments to vendors I did not recognize in amounts that were individually small and collectively significant. Delgado Home Services. Delgado Property Consulting. DPM Administrative. Companies with names designed to blend into the routine expense records of a household managed by someone named Delgado. I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I called Robert Finch. Robert Finch had been my personal attorney for 20 years, not my judicial clerk, not a colleague from the bench, but the specific attorney I had retained for my own personal legal matters when I had been appointed to the federal bench and had needed to separate my professional and personal legal affairs entirely. He was 60 years old, meticulous, and the kind of attorney who had developed, over a long career of handling difficult situations for people in complicated circumstances, the specific quality of receiving bad news without performing shock. I called him at 7 o'clock on Thursday evening. I told him what I had found. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "How many documents did you find?" 2 property transfers and approximately 30 fraudulent expense payments, I said. Potentially more. I haven't finished going through everything. The property transfers, are they recorded with the county? I'll check tomorrow, I said. Based on what I'm seeing in the files, yes. What's your relationship with the rental properties title insurance company? Standard policy. I've had it for 15 years. Call them first thing tomorrow, before you do anything else. If the transfers are recorded, the title insurance company needs to know immediately. He paused. Thomas. The signature on the transfer documents, are you certain it's not yours? I said, Robert. I spent 43 years on the law. I know my own signature. I know you do, he said. I needed to ask. I know, I said. Ask everything. Ask it all. He said, I'll be at your house at 9 tomorrow morning. Don't contact Maria. Don't change your behavior with her in any way before we talk. I said, I know how to maintain composure in the presence of someone I'm building a case against. I know you do, he said again. I'll see you at 9. I hung up. I sat at my desk in the study where Claire had pointed at the filing cabinet for 7 months. The window where she had sat in her wheelchair was dark now. The chair itself moved to a corner of the room in the reorganization I had been undertaking. I looked at the corner where it sat. I thought about her. I thought about 7 months of pointing, 7 months of her eyes saying something her mouth could not form, 7 months of me telling her everything was fine. I thought about 2 words written with the left hand. I picked up the photograph on my desk, Claire at our daughter's wedding in 2015, 6 years before the stroke, laughing at something our son-in-law had said, entirely herself, the full power of her attention directed at a moment of happiness in the way she directed her full attention at everything. I said, out loud, in the quiet study, I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm listening now. Then I went to bed, because the morning required me to be sharp, and being sharp required sleep, and Claire had always said that self-pity was the least productive emotional state available and that the most useful response to having gotten something wrong was to get the next thing right. I intended to get the next thing right. Robert arrived at 9 on Friday morning and we spent 4 hours going through the files together, which produced a picture considerably more detailed and more damaging than my preliminary review the previous evening had suggested. The property transfers were, as I had anticipated, recorded with the county recorder's office. The recording dates matched the document dates in the files. The notary who had certified the signatures was a woman named Gloria Reyes, whose name I did not recognize and whose commission Robert confirmed was active and legitimate. She had certified 2 documents bearing my forged signature, which made her either a participant in the fraud or a victim of a presentation sufficiently convincing that she had not questioned it. The financial fraud was more extensive than the 30 fraudulent payments I had initially identified. Robert's forensic accountant, who joined us on Saturday morning with her laptop and 3 hours of focused attention, found 47 payments to the Delgado-affiliated entities over 18 months, totaling $63,000 extracted from the household accounts. The rental property transfer was the larger issue. The property had been assessed at $410,000. Both 50% interests had been transferred to Delgado Property Management LLC for nominal consideration, the first for $1, the second for $1, which is the standard mechanism for a fraudulent property transfer designed to move ownership while leaving a minimal paper trail. $410,000 in property. $63,000 in account extractions. $473,000 total. Over the 2 years when I had been sitting beside my wife in her wheelchair, managing her medical appointments, learning to communicate with her through picture boards and yes and no questions, telling her everything was fine when she pointed at the cabinet, Maria Delgado had removed $473,000 from the life we had built together. The forensic accountant left at noon on Saturday. Robert stayed. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had made coffee every morning for 15 years with Maria moving through the house behind me, the same table where Claire had sat on the mornings the stroke had left her strong enough for the kitchen, and Robert said, "I want to lay out the legal picture and then I want to ask you a question." "Go ahead," I said. He laid out the picture. Property fraud. Forgery. Financial elder abuse, a category of criminal charge that existed specifically for what had been done to me, which required a separate accounting from both of us, me as the victim and him as the attorney, of what it meant to apply that category to a retired federal judge who had spent years on the bench applying it to others. I received this without comment. The categories were accurate. The law was the law regardless of the professional identity of the person to whom it applied. The question, Robert said, is whether you want to handle this through civil recovery alone or whether you want criminal referral. I said, both. He looked at me. She forged my signature on 2 property transfer documents, I said. She extracted $63,000 through fraudulent invoicing. She did this while my wife was dying, while I was caring for my wife, while my wife was trying to warn me and could not make herself understood. I paused. She did not make a mistake. She made a plan. Criminal referral. Robert nodded. He made a note. Then I want to do one more thing before we move, he said. I want to talk to Sarah Kwan. Sarah Kwan. Claire's physical therapist. The woman who had told me that Maria's presence was stabilizing for Claire. Why Sarah? I said. Robert said, because there's something I want to know about those last 7 months. Sarah Kwan came to my house on Monday morning, and she sat at the kitchen table with the specific careful composure of a young professional who has been told something significant and who is trying to organize it into a form that can be communicated usefully. She was 34 years old and she had been Claire's physical therapist for 19 months, from 2 months after the stroke until Claire's death, and she had been present in our house 3 mornings a week for those 19 months in the specific background way of medical professionals who become part of a household's rhythm without becoming part of its social life. She had seen things. Robert led the conversation, which I was grateful for, because my judicial instinct for questioning witnesses would have produced a more adversarial register than the situation required. He asked her gently and specifically about what she had observed in the house during the period of Claire's pointing. She said, "I want to tell you something I should have told you sooner. I didn't know what to do with it and I convinced myself it wasn't my place." I said, "Tell me now." She said, Mrs. Brennan pointed at the filing cabinet when Maria was in the room in a way that was different from when Maria wasn't in the room. I noticed this about 4 months into the behavior. When I was alone with Mrs. Brennan in the study, she pointed at the cabinet maybe once per session, calmly, like she was reminding herself of something. When Maria came into the room, the pointing became more urgent, more distressed. I sat with this. "She was pointing at Maria," I said. "Not at the cabinet." Sarah looked at her hands. "I think so. Yes. I think she was trying to tell you something about Maria, and the cabinet was the closest thing she could point to that connected to what she was trying to say." The room was very quiet. "You said the pointing was different when Maria was in the room," Robert said. "Did Maria seem to notice this?" Sarah said, "Yes. Maria would redirect her. Very gently. She'd take Mrs. Brennan's hand and say something like, 'Let's not worry about the study, Claire, let's go look at the garden.' And Mrs. Brennan would go, but she'd look back over her shoulder. She looked back over her shoulder. Every time. For 7 months. Looking back at the cabinet, at the room, at the files, at the thing she was trying to say. And Maria, gently and consistently and with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for months, redirecting her away from it. I had watched this happen. I had seen Maria take Claire's hand and suggest the garden and I had been grateful for the patience. I had read it as kindness. It was containment. I said, "Sarah, was there anything else?" She said, "One more thing. About 2 months before Mrs. Brennan died, I arrived for a session and found her at the desk in the study. She had a piece of paper in front of her and she was writing, very slowly, very carefully, with her left hand. When she saw me she folded the paper quickly and held it against her chest. She hid it," I said. "She held it," Sarah said. "I didn't ask what it was. I thought it was personal. A letter to you, maybe, or something she wanted to keep private. She put it somewhere in the study before we began the session." She paused. I should have said something. I didn't know what she was writing. I didn't know any of this. But I saw it and I didn't mention it and I've thought about it since you called me. "You couldn't have known," I said. "No," she said. "But I should have said something about the cabinet and about Maria. The pattern was there. I saw it and I didn't know what to do with it." "You're telling me now," I said. "That's what matters." She was. And what she was telling me confirmed what I already knew and added a detail I had not known, that Claire had hidden the note from Maria. That she had written it privately, hidden it in the study, trusted that it would be found. She had trusted me to find it. She had placed it where I would find it if I moved the cabinet, and she had known I would eventually move the cabinet, because reorganizing the study was something I had been talking about for 3 years and simply hadn't gotten to. She had known me well enough to know where I would eventually look. She had left me what she could. In the 2 words she was able to write with her left hand. Maria Files. Maria arrived at 8 o'clock every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning, which meant that the Monday after Robert and I had completed our initial review was a day I had to sit in my kitchen while Maria moved through my house with the comfortable ease of 15 years of familiarity, and I had to behave exactly as I had behaved on every other Monday for 15 years. I am a retired federal judge. I have presided over cases in which maintaining composure in the presence of information that required a response was the daily professional requirement. I have heard testimony from people I knew to be lying and I have not revealed that I knew. I have read briefs containing arguments I found offensive and I have responded with the measured consideration the law requires. I have never in my life found the performance as difficult as I found it that Monday morning. She came through the door with the cheerful efficiency she had always brought to Monday mornings. The week resetting, the house requiring attention, the specific energy of a person who is good at their work and knows it. She asked how I was. She made a comment about the weather. She went to the cleaning supplies in the utility room and began her routine, moving through the house with 15 years of knowing exactly where everything was and what it needed. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and the newspaper and I watched her move through the house and I said, when she came through the kitchen, "Maria, did you ever find my old property tax files?" I thought they were in the second drawer of the study cabinet, but I can't seem to locate the 2019 records. She did not miss a beat. I'll check when I do the study, she said. I may have reorganized them when I filed the 2020 records. I'm sorry if that caused confusion. I said, no trouble. Whenever you get to it. She nodded and moved on. I watched her go. I may have reorganized them. 15 years of working for us, and she said I may have reorganized them with the specific casual smoothness of someone who was not alarmed by the question because she had no reason to believe I had found anything, because she had intercepted the correspondence and managed the files and stood between me and the information for 14 months and had every reason to believe the management was holding. I drank my coffee. I read 3 paragraphs of the newspaper without absorbing any of them. I waited. At 10:30, I told her I had an appointment and would be out until noon. I drove 2 blocks from the house, parked, and called Robert. Monday is confirmed, I said. She's comfortable. She has no idea. Good, Robert said. We'll be ready Thursday. While I maintained the performance, Robert was building what he needed. The forensic handwriting examiner Robert retained, a woman named Dr. Patricia Nakamura, who had testified in federal court cases as an expert witness and whose credentials were, as Robert put it, unimpeachable, reviewed photographs of the signatures on the transfer documents alongside exemplars of my authentic signature from 30 years of official documents. Her preliminary assessment arrived Wednesday afternoon. The signatures on the transfer documents were not authentic. They were competent forgeries, produced by someone who had studied my signature carefully and practiced it sufficiently to produce a convincing imitation at a glance, but who had not been able to replicate the specific biomechanical characteristics of a signature produced by someone who has been writing the same name for 69 years. The pen pressure patterns were wrong. The specific velocity of the letter forms was inconsistent with someone signing habitually rather than carefully. She could not have known this from looking at the signatures herself. She had thought she was signing documents that required no more than her practiced skill. What she had not understood was that forging a signature and reproducing a signature are different skills, and the second one, the authentic one, leaves traces that the first one cannot replicate. Robert also obtained the recording from the notary, Gloria Reyes. Under questioning from a county investigator, Reyes described a woman, matching Maria's description, who had brought the transfer documents for signature, presenting herself as acting on behalf of Thomas Brennan, the property owner, who was unable to attend the notarization in person due to his wife's illness. She had presented what appeared to be a valid power of attorney, authorizing her to act on my behalf. There was no valid power of attorney. I had not executed one. The power of attorney document presented to the notary was also forged. The investigator obtained the full picture of Delgado Property Management LLC. It had been registered 14 months earlier, shortly before the first property transfer. Its registered agent was Maria's nephew, a 23-year-old named Eduardo Delgado who, when interviewed, initially claimed to have no knowledge of the company's specific financial activities and then, when presented with his name on the registration documents and his signature on the bank account opening forms, revised his account significantly and agreed to cooperation. He was 23 years old. Maria was 52. The cooperation cost him exposure and cost her corroboration she had not expected to need. Thursday arrived. Maria arrived at 8 o'clock on Thursday morning, the way she arrived every Thursday morning, with the cheerful efficiency of 15 years of familiarity and the complete absence of awareness that the specific Thursday had been selected for a reason. Robert Finch was in the living room, which I had asked him to be because I wanted a witness to everything that was said and because I knew that my own composure was more reliable in the presence of another professional. 2 investigators from the county attorney's office were in an unmarked car on the street outside. A detective from the financial crimes unit was in the car behind them. I was at the kitchen table. Coffee. Newspaper. Exactly as I was every Thursday morning. Maria came through the door. She said good morning. She set her bag down. She moved toward the utility room for the cleaning supplies. I said, Maria, can you sit down for a minute? There's something I want to talk to you about. She turned. She read my tone, not alarmed yet, but attending. Of course, she said. She came to the table. She sat across from me. I placed the 2 property transfer documents on the table between us. She looked at them. The specific quality of her stillness when she looked at them told me everything I needed to know about what she had expected and what she had not expected. She had not expected that the documents were something I had found. She had expected, if anything, that there was some administrative issue, a follow-up from the county recorder's office, perhaps, a question about a filing that she could navigate with the smoothness that had navigated everything else. She looked at the documents. She looked at me. And in the moment between those two looks, I watched her calculate, in the specific way of someone assessing how much I knew and how much I could prove. I said, "I found Claire's note." She was quiet. "Behind the filing cabinet," I said. 2 words. Her handwriting. Maria Files. Still quiet. "She knew," I said. "She was trying to tell me for 7 months." She sat in her wheelchair by the window and she pointed at the cabinet and I told her everything was fine. I told her everything was fine. I stopped. I allowed myself one moment with what that cost to say out loud. Then I continued. I did not listen to my wife because I believed she was confused. She was not confused. She was the most careful reader of documents I have ever known, and she read something in those files that told her what you were doing, and she spent 7 months trying to reach me through the aphasia, and I didn't hear her. Maria said, "Thomas." "You don't call me Thomas," I said. It came out steady. 43 years of the bench in every syllable. She closed her mouth. "Robert," I said. Robert came from the living room. He set a folder on the table containing the forensic handwriting analysis, the notary's identification, Eduardo's cooperation agreement, and the complete financial audit. He set it in front of Maria without comment. She looked at the folder. She did not open it. "The county attorney's office has been notified," Robert said. "The investigators outside are here to take your statement. You should call your attorney before you speak with them." Maria looked at the documents. She looked at the folder. She looked at me. And then she said something I had not expected and that I have thought about many times since, in the way you think about things that reveal character more completely than anything else available. She said, "She never liked me. Even before the stroke. She always watched me." I looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," I said. "She did. She was right to." I stood up. I walked to the living room and I opened the front door and I nodded to the investigators on the street, and they came up the walk, and that was the end of Maria Delgado's 15 years in our house. The criminal process moved with the specific pace of criminal processes, measured, thorough, impervious to the urgency of the person most affected by its subject matter. I had spent enough years on the bench to understand this pace and to trust it rather than resist it, which did not make the waiting easier but made it more manageable. Maria was charged with property fraud, forgery, financial elder abuse, and theft by false pretenses. Eduardo, her nephew, faced related charges and had agreed to cooperate fully, which his attorney had apparently advised him was the only rational response to being the registered agent of a fraudulent LLC and the signatory on its bank accounts. The property transfers were reversed through a court order obtained by Robert within 3 weeks of the initial filing, on the grounds of fraudulent conveyance and forged instrument. The title insurance company was involved in the reversal and was, to their credit, efficient and cooperative once the forensic evidence was presented. The $63,000 extracted through fraudulent vendor payments was a longer recovery. Delgado Property Management LLC's accounts had been substantially drawn down before the investigation began, and the recovery would be partial and slow. Robert obtained a civil judgment against Maria personally for the full amount, which would be enforced through whatever assets and future income she possessed. It was not a satisfying resolution in the way of resolutions that result in full recovery. It was the resolution the law provided. Maria did not contest the criminal charges in the way I had half expected from someone who had sustained a 15-year performance with sufficient skill to fool me for 14 months of heightened vulnerability. She retained a defense attorney who negotiated a plea agreement that included an admission of guilt, restitution to the extent of her recoverable assets, and a prison term. At the sentencing, the judge, a woman I had known professionally for a decade and whom I trusted to apply the law correctly regardless of the relationship, read aloud from the victim impact statement I had submitted. I had written one paragraph that I want to share with you, because it says what I have been trying to say throughout this story and says it in the form that I was able to find when I had to put it into the specific, precise language of a legal document. The paragraph said, The primary victim of this fraud is not Thomas Brennan, the retired federal judge who lost property and money and who is equipped by training and circumstance to pursue legal remedy. The primary victim is Claire Brennan, who saw what was happening and spent 7 months trying to communicate it through the devastating limitation of her post-stroke aphasia, and who was not heard because the person she most needed to hear her trusted the wrong person's performance over his own wife's anguished pointing. The court sentence should reflect not only the financial harm done to a surviving spouse but the specific cruelty of a fraud conducted in the presence of a dying woman who was actively trying to report it. The judge read this aloud. The courtroom was quiet. Maria was looking at the table in front of her. She did not look up while the paragraph was read. 8 months after the sentencing, the chair is still by the window. I have reorganized the study. The cabinet is on the opposite wall now, which is what I was doing when I found the note. The desk is repositioned. The bookshelves are reorganized. The room is different from what it was when Claire pointed at the filing cabinet from her wheelchair every afternoon. The chair is still by the window. I have moved everything else and I have not moved the chair, because the chair is where she was and because where she was is worth marking. I sit in it sometimes. Not in a morbid way. In the specific way of someone who wants to understand what a person saw from a particular position, who wants to inhabit the viewpoint for a few minutes and see what the world looked like from there. From the chair by the window, you can see the filing cabinet. You can see exactly where it is, what it is near, how it sits in the room. You can see the desk where I sit. You can see the door where Maria would appear. You can see everything Claire saw on those afternoon sessions, the full geography of the room that told her something was wrong and that she could not make me understand. I sit in it and I understand what she was trying to tell me. Not abstractly, the way I understood it from the note. From the chair itself, with the room arranged as it was, I understand it the way she understood it, from the inside of the knowing, before the language to express it was available. She knew. She knew from the chair. She knew from the documents she had seen over decades of careful attention to everything that passed through the filing cabinet. She knew from the way Maria moved, from the small observable tells of a person managing a situation rather than simply inhabiting it. She knew. And she pointed. And I told her everything was fine. I sit in the chair and I let this be what it is, which is a mistake I made and cannot unmake, performed in the middle of the most difficult period of my life, from within the specific fog of watching someone I loved disappear gradually while still being present. I do not think I could have done better. I think the fog was real and the trust was reasonable and the neurologist's advice about redirection was given in good faith and applied as instructed. I do not carry this as guilt that paralyzes. I carry it as knowledge. As the specific knowledge of a man who has been trained for 43 years to read the evidence in front of him and who missed the most important evidence of his life because it was presented by the person he loved most, through the limited mechanism available to her, in a form he was not yet ready to receive. He is ready now. He will be ready for the rest of whatever time remains. The chair is by the window. The roses that Claire planted in the garden 15 years ago are still growing. The study has been reorganized except for the chair, which is where it belongs. And on the desk, in the drawer where I keep the things that matter most, is a folded piece of paper in shaky left-handed writing. Maria files. I look at it sometimes. Not often enough. She was the most careful reader of documents I have ever known. She read everything. She read Maria. She read what was happening in our house while I was too consumed with loving her to look at anything else. She found a way to tell me. I found a way to hear her. That is what this story is about. Not the fraud is the context. What the story is about is two people who spent 41 years learning to communicate with each other, and who found, at the very end, when the mechanisms of communication had been damaged beyond repair, that 41 years of knowing someone builds a channel that survives even that. She left me 2 words. I found them. I did what she was asking. That was enough. That is always enough. The steady father listens. Even when the listening comes late, even when it comes from behind a filing cabinet, in shaky left-handed writing, he listens. And then he acts. I want to tell you what 43 years of federal law teaches you, because it is different from what most people assume it teaches and because the difference is relevant to everything in this story. People assume that a legal career teaches you to distrust. To see fraud in every presentation, manipulation in every kindness, self-interest behind every apparent generosity. This is not what it teaches. What it actually teaches, what any honest practitioner will tell you it teaches, is the difference between evidence and assumption. Assumption says, this person has been in my house for 15 years and has always been honest, therefore she is honest now. Evidence says, what do the documents show? What does the pattern of behavior demonstrate? What does the person who cannot speak words but can still point tell you when you pay attention to what she is pointing at? I spent 43 years distinguishing evidence from assumption. I applied the distinction rigorously on the bench. And I did not apply it to Maria Delgado for 14 months of the most important investigation in my personal life, because the assumption, 15 years, always honest, part of the family, was strong enough to override the evidence that was accumulating in the files and in the financial records and in my wife's pointing finger. I was wrong to let it. I know this. I have made my peace with it in the way I have made peace with the other things in this story that cannot be changed, by being as accurate about them as possible and by resolving to apply what the accuracy teaches going forward. What it teaches, specifically, is this: the evidence of the people who love you most is not less credible because it is delivered imperfectly. It is not less credible because the person delivering it cannot form the words they need. It is not less credible because the mechanism is a pointing finger and a shaky note and 7 months of repeated, frustrated insistence from a wheelchair by a window. Claire was my best witness. She was the most careful observer of documents I have ever known, and she saw what was happening, and she told me as clearly as she could, and I did not hear her. I will not make that mistake again. I will not assume. I will look at the evidence. I will listen to the people who love me, in whatever form the listening requires, in words, in pointing, in notes hidden behind filing cabinets, in every imperfect mechanism available to someone who is trying to tell me the truth. The truth finds a way. Claire found a way. The steady father hears it now. He will always hear it now. She sat beside the window and she pointed at the files. Her hand was steady, her eyes clear across 1,000 miles of damage and of silence and of everything between a woman who knew exactly what the documents would mean. He said, "It's fine, don't worry, let's go sit out in the sun." He didn't know the warning and the pointing weren't done. She looked back over her shoulder every time he led her away. She wrote it down in secret in the drawer where it would stay. 2 words in shaky writing, with an arrow pointing down, left behind the cabinet in the corner of the room. Maria files, it said there. In the hand she'd learned to use, the clearest thing she'd said in all those months she couldn't choose. He found it when he moved it and the world reorganized around the thing she'd known and tried to reach him with those eyes. He sat in the chair beside the window where she used to be and understood at last what she had always tried to see. So here's to every quiet warning offered from a chair, to every pointed finger and the truth that's pointing there, to every wife who found a way to speak past what was wrong, and every steady father who will hear it all along. He listens now. He'll always listen now. She found a way to tell him. He found a way to hear. That is the whole of what the story is. That is everything. That is the steady father. Maria Delgado had worked in our house since 2008, and I want to tell you what 15 years of a person's presence in your life looks like, because without understanding that I cannot make the betrayal make sense in the way it needs to make sense. She knew where we kept the spare key for the garden shed. She knew that I preferred my coffee at a specific temperature and that Claire preferred hers stronger. She knew that we kept the birthday cards for our grandchildren in the second drawer of the hall console, and that the good tablecloth was on the top shelf of the linen closet, and that the specific cleaning product for the marble countertops was different from the one for the granite, and that I had a sensitive reaction to certain brands of furniture polish. She knew these things not because she had memorized a manual, but because she had been present in our lives long enough to absorb them the way you absorb the specific character of a place you inhabit consistently. She knew our house the way people know places they have given sustained attention to, and she had given it that attention for 15 years. Our children knew her name. Our grandchildren, who visited on holidays, accepted her presence in the house with the uncomplicated ease of children who have always found a particular person in a particular place and who have no framework for imagining that place without them. She had given our youngest grandchild a birthday card, once, that the child had kept. She had given a birthday card to a child. I think about this sometimes when I am trying to hold simultaneously the 15 years and the 14 months, the person she appeared to be for the first 13 years and what she was doing in the last 2. I think about the birthday card and the birthday card's recipient, who is now 12 years old and who will not understand, for many more years, the specific complicated nature of the presence she experienced as simple warmth. This is not what most people expect fraud to look like. Fraud, in most people's imagination, is performed by strangers, people without prior relationship, without history, without the specific texture of 15 years of a presence that has been woven into the ordinary fabric of daily life. The fraud that is most damaging is almost never performed by strangers. It is performed by people whose presence we have stopped questioning because the questioning has come to seem unnecessary, because the evidence of the preceding years has been consistently legitimate. Maria had built 15 years of legitimate evidence. She had built it on purpose, or she had built it because the opportunity had not previously presented itself, and I do not know which of those two things is true, and perhaps it does not matter for the purposes of what justice required. What I know is that the 15 years made the 14 months possible. The trust was real. The trust had been earned through consistent behavior over a long period. And the trust was then used as a mechanism. That is what makes it fraud rather than simply theft. The theft was the taking of money and property. The fraud was the 15 years that made the taking possible. I want to tell you about a conversation Claire and I had in 2019, 2 years before the stroke, because it was a conversation I remembered clearly in the days after I found the note, and that took on a different character in the context of what I subsequently discovered. We were sitting on the back porch in the evening, the way we often sat on summer evenings, with whatever we were drinking and the specific quality of ease that 40 years of a shared life produces in two people who have learned to be comfortable in each other's silence. Claire had been working in the garden that afternoon and was still in her gardening clothes, which she wore with the same complete absence of self-consciousness she wore everything. She said, without preamble, "I've been thinking about Maria." I said, "What about her?" She said, "I think she's taking things." I turned to look at her. "What kind of things?" She said, "Small things. Not consistently. Not in a pattern I can point to definitively. But I've noticed a few things missing over the last few months and I can't explain them otherwise." I said, "Why haven't you mentioned this before?" She said, "Because I wasn't sure. I didn't want to accuse someone on the basis of uncertainty." She paused. "I'm still not sure. It's possible I've misplaced things. It's possible there are explanations I haven't thought of. But I've been paying attention and I have not been able to find another explanation." I asked her what was missing. She described 3 items: a small silver letter opener that had been on my desk, a decorative bowl that had been on the shelf in the living room, a scarf she had not been able to locate for 2 months. None of the items was particularly valuable. All of them were the specific kind of thing that could have been misplaced, broken, donated inadvertently, lost in the ordinary turnover of domestic life. I said, "Claire, a silver letter opener and a scarf. That's not evidence." She looked at me for a moment with the specific expression she wore when she was deciding whether to press something or let it settle. She let it settle. She said, "You're probably right." She went back to her drink. We sat in the garden. The subject did not come up again. In 2022, sitting at my desk in the aftermath of finding the note, I thought about that conversation. About Claire saying she'd been paying attention. About the letter opener and the scarf. About me saying that's not evidence. She had been paying attention in 2019. She had been paying attention for years before the stroke. She had noticed something that I had dismissed as insufficient, and she had been correct about the direction the insufficiency was pointing, even if the specific items she had identified were too small to constitute proof. She had told me in 2019. I had not heard it. She had tried to tell me again for 7 months from a wheelchair. I had not heard that either. She had written it down and hidden it where I would eventually find it. And I had heard it on a Thursday afternoon in September, when I moved a filing cabinet, 2 years after the note was written and 8 months after she was gone. She never stopped trying. Even from the worst of circumstances, even through the most brutal limitation, she never stopped trying to reach me with what she knew. That is Claire. That is 41 years of a woman who had decided that the truth was the most useful thing available and that providing it, in whatever form providing it required, was the most valuable service she could offer. She kept offering it until she couldn't. Robert Finch came back to the house on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks after the confrontation, Not for a legal meeting but for the specific visit of a professional colleague who is also something approaching a friend and who understands that the transition from the acute phase of a difficult situation to its aftermath requires a different kind of attention than the legal work itself. He sat at the kitchen table, of course, and he said, when we had been talking for a while about the case's progress, "I want to tell you something professionally." "Go ahead," I said. He said, "In 20 years of handling property fraud cases, I have not seen a case where the forger was as practiced as Maria was. The signatures she produced were not the work of someone who decided to try this on a Tuesday. They required preparation. They required access to exemplars of your signature over time. They required practice." I thought about this. "She had access to my signature for 15 years, I said. "Every time I signed anything that went through the household files, checks, letters, tax records, she could have seen it." "Yes," Robert said. "I believe she was preparing for this for significantly longer than 14 months. I believe the opportunity she was waiting for was the specific vulnerability of your wife's illness. She was watching for that vulnerability and she was ready when it arrived." This was not a surprise. I had arrived at the same conclusion independently. But hearing it from Robert, precisely stated, gave it the specific weight of a thing confirmed rather than suspected. "The birthday card," I said. Robert looked at me. "She gave our youngest grandchild a birthday card," I said. 3 years ago. The child kept it." Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thomas, people who do this kind of thing are not necessarily the opposite of what they appear to be in every respect. The birthday card may have been genuine. The care she showed for your grandchildren may have been genuine. The competence and the reliability for the first 13 years may have been genuine." He paused. "The fraud was also genuine. Those things coexist. That's what makes it complicated and that's what makes it possible. People who are entirely performing, with no genuine component, are easier to detect." I thought about this for a long time after he left. The genuine components were what had made the fraud possible. 15 years of genuine competence and genuine presence and genuine warmth had built the trust that the fraud required. Maria had not manufactured those 15 years entirely cynically. Some of it had been real. And the real parts had made the other parts invisible. This is, I think, the hardest thing to hold about the people who do this. They are not simply villains performing goodness. They are complicated people in whom genuine qualities and exploitative intentions exist simultaneously, and the simultaneous existence is what makes them effective and what makes the betrayal so specifically disorienting when it is eventually revealed. I am holding it. I am holding all of it. Claire held it for at least 3 years before the stroke, from the evening on the porch when she mentioned the letter opener and the scarf. She held the full complicated picture, the 15 years and the growing wrongness, without resolving it into something simpler, because she was a lawyer and she understood that complicated things do not become less complicated by being flattened, and that the flattening produces less accurate understanding rather than more. She saw Maria clearly. She loved me enough to try to tell me. I hold it the way she held it. Completely. Without flattening. Sarah Kwan sent me a card 6 weeks after the sentencing. It was a simple card, not a condolence card, not quite a congratulations card, simply a card that said something thoughtful about loss and about the specific difficulty of the preceding 2 years. Inside, she had written a paragraph in her own handwriting. She wrote, "I have been a physical therapist for 11 years and I have worked with many post-stroke patients who have difficulty with expressive language. The thing I want you to know is that Mrs. Brennan was an exceptional communicator within the limitations of her aphasia. She found ways to make herself understood that went well beyond what most patients achieve in the same time frame. She worked at it every session with the determination of someone who understood that communication was not a luxury but a necessity. I do not think she failed to communicate what she was trying to communicate. I think she communicated it as clearly as her situation permitted and that the failure was not hers. I wanted you to know that. I should have said it sooner but I am saying it now. I read this card several times. Then I put it in the drawer with the note. She communicated as clearly as her situation permitted. She pointed. She looked back over her shoulder. She hid a note in a place she knew I would eventually find. She communicated as clearly as her situation permitted. The failure was not hers. The failure was mine, not a failure of love or of intention, but a failure of listening, of reading the evidence in front of me rather than trusting the assumption that everything was fine because I wanted everything to be fine. I have made my peace with this. Not because it is comfortable, it is not comfortable. Because the alternative to making peace with it is to carry it as a guilt that prevents the going forward, and Claire did not spend 22 months trying to reach me through every available channel so that I could use the reaching as an occasion for paralysis. She did it so that I would act. She did it so that what was wrong would be addressed. She did it with the specific purposefulness of a woman who had spent her whole life directing her effort toward outcomes rather than expressions of feeling. The outcome she was trying to produce was justice. The justice arrived. It arrived late and imperfectly, the way justice almost always arrives. But it arrived. She would be satisfied with that. She was always, in the end, practical. There was one more thing Sarah told me, in a follow-up conversation after the sentencing, that I want to include because it is the detail that has stayed with me most persistently and that I think completes the picture of what Claire was doing in those 7 months. Sarah said, there was a period of about 6 weeks, around month 4 or 5 of the pointing, when Mrs. Brennan seemed to give up on the cabinet. She stopped pointing at it. She seemed withdrawn in a different way, not frustrated, more resigned. I thought she was having a harder month generally. I said, and then? And then she started again, Sarah said. More focused than before. More persistent. As if she had decided something. I sat with this. She had given up. And then she had decided not to give up. She had decided to write the note instead. The decision to write the note, with her left hand, slowly, carefully, hiding it from Maria and hiding it in the specific place she knew I would eventually look, was not the act of someone who was confused. It was the act of a civil rights attorney who understood that when one communication strategy was not working, you tried another. When pointing did not produce the response you needed, you wrote it down. When you couldn't put it where it would be immediately found, you put it where it would eventually be found. She adapted. She kept trying. She was, until the very end, solving the problem. That is Claire. That is the woman I was married to for 41 years. Not the woman in the wheelchair who could not form words. The woman who couldn't form words and who adapted and who kept trying and who found a way to communicate the most important thing she needed to say in the form that was available to her. 2 words. Written with her left hand. Hidden where I would find them when I was ready. I found them when I was ready. Eduardo Delgado was 23 years old when the investigation began, and he was, in the fullest sense of the available evidence, someone who had made decisions he did not fully understand the implications of because they had been presented to him by an authority figure he trusted, his aunt, in terms that obscured their nature. He had registered the LLC at Maria's direction, believing it to be a legitimate business entity for property management services. He had opened the bank accounts at Maria's direction, believing the accounts were for a legitimate business. He had signed documents at Maria's direction without reading them carefully enough to understand what they actually transferred. He was not innocent. He had signed things without reading them, which is the specific failure that the law has always recognized as creating liability regardless of subjective intent. But he was also not the architect of what had been done. He was someone who had trusted an authority figure and had not asked the questions that asking would have required him to distrust her. He cooperated fully when presented with the evidence. He told the investigators everything he knew about the specific timeline of events, the specific instructions Maria had given him, the specific documents he had signed. His cooperation was complete in the way that the cooperation of someone who is frightened and genuinely sorry tends to be complete. I did not pursue civil charges against Eduardo separately. Robert advised that I could and also advised that the recoverable damages from a 23-year-old with minimal assets were negligible in the context of the larger recovery, and that the energy required for the pursuit would exceed the value of the outcome. I agreed with this analysis. I also agreed with it on the basis of something that was not purely financial. Eduardo had not designed the fraud. He had been used in it, in a way that was less different from how I had been used than was comfortable to acknowledge. He had trusted someone he should have questioned more carefully. I had done the same thing. The difference between us was that his failure to question had made him legally complicit in the fraud and mine had made me its primary victim. These outcomes do not feel symmetrical. They are legally accurate. He made restitution of the amounts that had passed through his personal accounts. He completed his cooperation agreement. He is 24 years old now, living with the specific knowledge of someone who has learned, at an early age and at significant cost, to read what he signs before he signs it. I hope the lesson holds. The rental property that Maria had transferred to Delgado Property Management LLC was a small commercial building on the east side of the city, 2 retail units on the ground floor and 2 small apartments above. Claire had purchased it in 1985, before we married, with money she had saved from her first years of legal practice and with the specific foresight of someone who understood that property in an urban area near a university was an investment that would compound over time. She had been right. She had been right for 35 years, during which the property had generated steady rental income and had appreciated in value to $410,000. She had never mentioned selling it. Not once in 35 years. It had been her first significant financial decision made independently, and she had maintained it with the same care she maintained everything she valued, consistently, quietly, without requiring acknowledgement. When I suggested, once, that we might consider selling it as part of a portfolio simplification, she had looked at me with the expression she wore when she found a suggestion insufficiently considered and said, "It's cash flow. We don't need the lump sum. Let it keep working." It kept working for 35 years. Then Maria transferred it for $1. The reversal of the transfer, obtained through Robert's civil filing, restored it to my name within 3 weeks of the initial court order. The property resumed generating cash flow within a month. On the first morning I received the rental deposit after the restoration, a direct deposit to the account where Claire had always received it, the account she had opened for this purpose 35 years ago. I sat at my desk and looked at the notification on my phone for a long time. She had purchased that property in 1985. She had maintained it for 35 years. She had tried to tell me it was in danger for 7 months from a wheelchair. She had written 2 words on a piece of paper and hidden it where I would find them. And the deposit was still coming in, the way it had come in every month for 35 years, because the property was back where it belonged. She would have found this entirely unremarkable. Of course the property was back. Of course the cash flow resumed. That was the whole point of the thing. You purchased it, you maintained it, you protected it from people who wanted to take it, and it kept working. She was right. It kept working. I have not told you about our children, and I want to, because they are part of the story that is happening after the main story, which is the part that matters most in the long run. We have 2, a daughter, Anna, who lives across the city and who came to the house within 2 hours of my call on Friday morning, and a son, Daniel, who drove 6 hours from where he lives and arrived Saturday afternoon. They sat at the kitchen table, of course, and I walked them through everything I had found, and they received it with the specific combination of fury and grief that is the response of adult children who have discovered that their father was defrauded during the period when their mother was dying. The fury was at Maria. The grief was, I think, for something more complex, for the 2 years of their mother's illness during which they had visited and helped and done what they could, and during which they had trusted the household that Maria managed because the household had always worked and because they were managing their own grief and their own lives alongside their mother's decline. They had trusted what was there. We all had. Anna asked me, in the specific direct way she had inherited from Claire, whether I had felt anything during the 14 months that I had dismissed or ignored. I told her about Claire's pointing. I told her about telling Claire everything was fine. Anna was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mom would have been furious at you for that." "I know," I said. "She would also have understood," Anna said. "She knew you. She knew how you received things when you weren't ready. She left the note for exactly that reason." This is the truest thing anyone said to me in the entire process. Claire had known that I would not be ready to hear the warning through pointing. She had known that I would need the note, the specific, documented, left-handwritten form of the truth that a man trained to receive evidence could receive when he found it in the right circumstances. She had calibrated her communication to my specific way of receiving information. She knew me that well. She loved me that precisely. 1 year after finding the note, I moved the chair. Not out of the study, I am not ready for that, and I am not certain I will ever be entirely ready for it, and I am making peace with the uncertainty rather than forcing a resolution. But I moved it from the corner where I had put it in the reorganization and I moved it back to the window where it had been when Claire was in it. I am not sure exactly why I moved it back. Some decisions are made from clarity and some from instinct, and this was from instinct, the sense that the chair belonged by the window because the window was where she had been and that the being there was something worth keeping present in the room even now. It is by the window. The filing cabinet is on the opposite wall. The study is, otherwise, the reorganized version I was creating when I found the note, different from what it was when Claire was pointing at the old cabinet position, but with the chair where it should be. I sit in it sometimes. I look at the filing cabinet from the chair. I try to see what she saw. I think I see it now. I think the 41 years and the note and the Thursday afternoon and the 11 months since have produced in me the specific capacity to see what she was seeing and to understand why it needed to be said and how complete her understanding was of what was happening in our house during those months. She was right about everything. She was right about Maria in 2019 and she was right about the cabinet in 2022 and she was right to hide the note where she hid it because she knew I would move the cabinet eventually and would find it when I did. I found it. I did what she was asking. The property is restored. The cash flow continues. The drawer holds the note and Sarah Kwan's card and the photograph of Claire at our daughter's wedding, laughing at something our son-in-law said. The chair is by the window. The steady father listens. He will always listen now. That is what she left him. That is everything. I want to tell you something about what 43 years as a federal judge teaches you that is relevant to this story and that I have not yet said directly. It teaches you that people are not simply what they appear. This is the most obvious lesson of the law and also the most persistently difficult to apply, because the appearance of a person is what you have access to in daily life and the deeper truth is available only through sustained and specific attention. But it teaches you something else, which is less obvious and more important, that you cannot read people accurately through sustained and specific attention if you have already decided what you are going to find. The verdict that is formed before the evidence is complete is not a verdict. It is an assumption wearing the clothes of a verdict. It has the shape of a conclusion and the weight of a prejudgment, and it is the most reliable way available to arrive at a wrong outcome while believing that you have been rigorous. I believed, for 14 months, that Maria was trustworthy. I had decided this on the basis of 15 years of prior behavior, and the decision was so thoroughly made that when new evidence began to accumulate, in the files, in the accounts, in my wife's pointing, it encountered the decision rather than encountering my open attention. The evidence did not fail me. The evidence was there. My attention had been allocated to a conclusion I had already reached, and the evidence arrived in a room where the conclusion was already occupying the space the evidence needed. This is the specific and expensive lesson of the 14 months. Not that trust is wrong. Not that relationships of long standing cannot be relied upon. But that any conclusion, however well-founded in prior evidence, requires the continued openness to current evidence that allows it to be revised when the current evidence requires revision. Claire maintained that openness. She had formed the same conclusion I had formed about Maria, 15 years of consistent reliability, part of the family, and she had nevertheless noticed when the current evidence began to suggest revision. She had begun revising in 2019, when she mentioned the letter opener and the scarf, and she had continued revising through the stroke and through the 7 months of pointing and through the writing of the note. She never stopped being open to current evidence. Even when the mechanism for communicating what the evidence was saying had been substantially damaged. She attended to what was actually there and she communicated it in whatever form was available. That is the judge I should be. That is the husband I should have been. I am attending now, with my full attention, to whatever is actually there. 8 months after the sentencing, my morning routine has a shape that is different from what it was during the 14 months of the fraud and different from what it was during the 2 years of Claire's illness. I wake at 6, which is an hour earlier than I woke during the years when the house was full of the activity of 2 people managing a shared life. The extra hour is mine alone and I have filled it with the specific things that serve the day rather than merely filling the time, reading, writing in a journal that I started the week after I found the note, a short walk through the neighborhood in whatever weather the morning presents. I check the financial accounts every morning. This is not anxiety, I want to be clear about that, because checking accounts every morning sounds like a man who has been traumatized into vigilance, and it is not that. It is the application of the lesson that the 14 months taught, which is that the accounts are part of my life and my life requires my attention. I attend to them. I attend to the property records. I attend to the correspondence. I attend to things that I had previously trusted someone else to attend to on my behalf, not because trusting people is wrong but because there are specific things that belong to the person most directly affected by them and that should not be fully delegated even to someone trustworthy. I check the rental property's deposit every month. It comes in on the 14th. I have noted this rhythm across 8 months now, the 14th, reliable, the specific ongoing evidence that the property is still working the way Claire bought it to work 35 years ago. I think about her when the deposit arrives. I think about 1985 and a young attorney making her first significant financial decision independently, deciding that property near a university in an urban area was worth the investment, being right about it for 35 years. I think about the word she used when I suggested selling it, it's cash flow. Let it keep working. It kept working. Even through the fraud, even through the temporary loss of title, it kept working. The building did not stop being what it was because someone tried to take it. It waited, the way solid things wait, for the situation around it to be corrected, and when the situation was corrected it resumed being exactly what it was. That is what solid things do. They wait. And when the situation resolves, they resume. I have been asked, by people who know what happened and who are processing their own version of the same question, how do you protect yourself, how do you know who to trust, what do you do differently, to distill what I learned into something applicable? I have thought about this carefully, because I am not interested in providing the comfortable general advice that sounds like wisdom and produces behavior that is not actually different from what produced the problem in the first place. I am interested in the specific, honest answer. The specific, honest answer is 3 things. The first, pay attention to what people who love you try to tell you, in whatever form they can manage. Claire tried to tell me twice, once in 2019 with words, once for 7 months with a pointing finger and a hidden note. Both times I did not fully hear her, because I had decided things were fine and the decision was more available to me than her communication. The lesson is not, listen to your wife, which is too general. The lesson is, when someone who knows you and cares about you is trying to tell you something, the form in which they tell it is shaped by what is available to them, and the limitation of the form does not limit the accuracy of the content. Attend to the content. Do not dismiss the message because the mechanism is imperfect. The second, the conclusion formed from past evidence requires openness to current evidence. Maria had 15 years of legitimacy. Those 15 years were real evidence and they justified the trust one had built. They did not justify the trust being maintained after the current evidence began suggesting something different. The judgment I reached in year 1 should not have been insulated from revision in year 16. Trust that cannot be revised in light of new evidence is not trust, it is assumption wearing trust's name. The third, the things that matter most require your direct attention. Not a delegate's attention, yours. I had delegated the financial accounts to Maria because I trusted her and because the delegation was convenient and because Claire's illness was consuming the attention I might otherwise have given to the accounts. These were all real considerations. They were also the specific conditions under which the fraud became possible. The things that are most important to you should receive your direct attention at the level they warrant, even when direct attention is inconvenient, even when someone trustworthy is available to manage them on your behalf. These 3 lessons do not guarantee that what happened to me cannot happen to you. They reduce the window. They make the fraud harder. They create the conditions under which you are more likely to hear the warning when it comes, in whatever form it comes. They are what Claire was trying to teach me for 41 years, in the specific daily way that people who love you teach you things, not through instruction, but through example and through the consistent attention they bring to their own lives that you observe across decades and absorb more slowly than they might hope. I absorbed it eventually. At significant cost. But I absorbed it. 3 months after the sentencing, Anna brought her children, our grandchildren, to the house for the first visit since Claire's death. There were 3 of them, Maya, who was 12, and the twins James and Sophie, who were 9. They came on a Saturday and they moved through the house with the comfortable familiarity of children who have always spent time in this place and who are readjusting to the absence of the specific person who had always been there when they came. Maya, who was old enough to have known Claire as a real person rather than simply a grandmother presence, asked me about the study. She had been in it a few times over the years, to use the computer, to look for a book, to show me a piece of schoolwork that she was proud of. She knew the room. She knew the chair by the window, which had been where Claire often sat in the final years. She asked, "Grandpa, why is Grandma's chair by the window?" I said, "Because that's where she liked to sit." She looked at the chair for a moment. Then she said, "I remember she used to point at things from there. The cabinet and stuff." I was quiet for a moment. "Yes," I said. "She did." "I thought she was confused," Maya said. She said it with the directness of a 12-year-old who is reporting a factual memory without a filter. "At the time." "So did I," I said. She looked at me. "Was she?" I sat down in the desk chair, which put me at her eye level. "No," I said. She wasn't confused. She was trying to tell me something important. I didn't understand what she was telling me until much later. Maya absorbed this with the specific seriousness of a 12-year-old who understands that adults sometimes fail to understand things and who finds this information about her grandfather both surprising and unremarkable. "But you figured it out?" she said. "I figured it out," I said. "Because of the note?" She looked at me. "Mom told me about the note." "Because of the note," I said. She looked at the chair for a moment longer. Then she said, "She was pretty smart." "She was the smartest person I ever knew," I said. Maya nodded, in the way of a 12-year-old who is accepting a piece of information and filing it away where it can be useful later. Then she went to find her brother and sister, because she was 12 and the conversation had delivered what it needed to deliver and there were other things to do on a Saturday afternoon. I sat at the desk for a moment after she left, looking at the chair by the window. Claire had pointed at the cabinet for 7 months. Her 12-year-old granddaughter had noticed. And had thought she was confused. And had accepted, without drama, the information that she had not been. The truth had been in front of all of us. In whatever form it could be communicated, it had been there. We are getting better at seeing it. I want to give you the final accounting, because honesty requires it and because this story has been about the honest accounting of things from the beginning. What was taken, $410,000 in property value, transferred for $1 each in 2 fraudulent transactions. $63,000 in household account extractions over 18 months. 14 months during which I trusted a fraud and did not attend to the accounts or the files or the evidence that was accumulating in them. 7 months during which my wife tried to tell me and I did not hear her. What was restored? The property, through Robert's civil filing and the court's reversal order. The financial damages, partially, through Maria's restitution obligation and Eduardo's contribution. The truth, through the note and the investigation and the sentencing and the record that now exists in the public legal record of exactly what happened and who did it. What cannot be restored? 14 months. 7 months of Claire pointing and me telling her everything was fine. The specific version of the trust one had in Maria, which will not exist again in that form for anyone. What remains? The chair by the window. The note in the drawer. Sarah Kwan's card. The rental deposit on the 14th of every month. The study reorganized around the evidence of what happened and what was found. The grandchildren who visit on Saturdays and who knew their grandmother and who will know, when they are old enough to hear the full story, that she did not stop trying to reach us even when reaching was almost impossible. The knowledge that she tried. That she kept trying. That she found a way. That is what remains. That is what she left me. That is enough. It is, in fact, more than enough. It is the most important thing available to carry forward from a story that cost a great deal and that produced, at the end, a man who listens, who will always listen now, in whatever form the listening requires, to whatever the people who love him find a way to tell him. The steady father listens. He will always listen now. Going forward. Carrying what she left. She found a way. He heard her. That is the steady father. That is everything. After Claire died, I found a box in the back of her closet that I had not known existed. It was a small cardboard box, the kind that comes with a ream of printer paper, and it was sealed with tape and labeled in Claire's pre-stroke handwriting, personal, T. It took me 3 months to open it. I am not going to explain this at length because the explanation would take longer than the content warrants and would be, ultimately, about the specific quality of grief that makes a sealed box with your name on it both urgent and impossible simultaneously. I opened it when I was ready, which was 3 months after she died. Inside were letters. Unsent letters, written to me over the years, not many, perhaps 15 or 20, spanning 30 years, on occasions when she had had something to say that she had decided not to say in the moment and had instead written down and kept. I read all of them over the course of a week. Some of them were about ordinary things, disagreements we had resolved differently, decisions she had wished I had made differently, moments in our shared life where she had had a response she had chosen not to give. Some were about our children, about her specific hopes and worries for each of them in terms she had not spoken aloud. One was about her own career, a case she had won that had cost her something she had not disclosed to me at the time, a personal toll she had processed on paper instead. Two were about Maria. The first, dated 2019, the same year as the evening conversation about the letter opener and the scarf, said this: I mentioned the missing things to Thomas tonight. He was kind and attentive and didn't believe me, which is his specific form of not hearing that I have learned to recognize and that I know is not cruelty but confidence, the confidence of a man who trusts the people he has decided to trust in the way that judges trust the cases they have already decided. I should have pressed harder. I didn't. I'll pay attention and see if it continues. The second, dated 6 months later, it is continuing. I have found 2 more things that I cannot explain by ordinary means. I am not going to say anything to Thomas again until I have something more specific, because the something more specific is what he needs and what he will be able to act on. I will keep watching. I will keep the record. If it ever becomes unambiguous, I will make sure he knows. She had been keeping a record. In 2019 and 2020, before the stroke, she had been attending to what was happening in our house and she had been building the case with the specific, methodical attention of the attorney she had always been. She had not brought it to me because she did not yet have what I needed, the something specific, the thing I could act on. And then the stroke had taken the mechanism for the record, and she had done what was possible with what remained, and the note behind the cabinet was the last version of the record she had been keeping since 2019. She had been building toward Maria files for 3 years. I sat with the letters for a long time. I thought about what 41 years of a marriage had produced in her, the specific, complete knowledge of how I received information and what form I needed it in, the patient understanding that the record she was building would matter more to me than the suspicion, the willingness to keep watching and keep noting and keep building toward the thing that would eventually reach me. She had built toward me for 41 years. She kept building right up until she couldn't. I put the letters in the drawer with the note and Sarah's card and the photograph. They belong together. They are the full picture of a woman who never stopped trying to reach me with the truth. 6 weeks after the property was restored to my name, a property tax bill arrived for the rental property, the first billing that had come to me directly since the interception of my mail had begun. The amount was what it always was. The property address was what it always was. It was an entirely ordinary piece of correspondence, the kind that arrives without ceremony and is paid without reflection and is filed in the property tax record section of a filing cabinet without a second thought. I sat at my desk with it for about 10 minutes. I thought about Claire purchasing the property in 1985 and receiving the first tax bill and paying it and filing it in whatever system she had at the time, a young attorney with her first investment property making the specific practical decisions that maintaining such a property requires. I thought about 35 years of tax bills arriving and being paid and being filed, and about what those 35 years of ordinary, unremarkable payments represented, the sustained attention of a person who understood that the things you value require consistent, unglamorous maintenance and who provided that maintenance without requiring it to be noticed. I thought about the tax bill that had arrived during the 14 months of the fraud, not to me, because my mail was being intercepted, but to Maria, or to Delgado Property Management LLC, or to wherever the correspondence had been rerouted as part of the mechanism. I thought about Claire and the filing cabinet. Then I wrote a check for the tax bill amount, addressed the envelope, and filed the bill in the property records section of the filing cabinet on the opposite wall. The cabinet is on the opposite wall now. I moved it when I reorganized the study. The chair is by the window. The note is in the drawer. The tax bill is in the file. The property keeps working. Claire keeps working, in all the forms in which someone who is gone keeps working, in the property she purchased and maintained and tried to protect, in the letters she wrote and did not send, in the 2 words she wrote with her left hand and hid where I would find them. She keeps working. That is what she always did. That is what she was when I met her and what she was for 41 years and what she is now, in the only form available to her. Working. Attending. Finding a way. The court record of Maria Delgado's case is a public document. It will remain a public document for a very long time, which is the nature of criminal court records, and which means that what Maria did and what she was convicted of and what sentence she received is now permanently available to anyone who has a reason to look. I think about this sometimes. About the permanence of the record. About the fact that the truth, once it is established in a court of law, has a specific and lasting form that is different from the truth as known by the people involved. It is the truth documented, witnessed, signed by a judge, entered into a system that preserves it regardless of what any of the individuals involved might prefer. I spent 43 years as a federal judge. I understand court records. I have generated court records. I have read court records. I understand their authority and their limitations and the specific way they capture certain kinds of truth while leaving other kinds of truth, the human texture, the full context, the complexity of what people are beyond what the record requires them to be, outside their scope. The record captures what Maria did. It captures the property fraud, the forgery, the financial elder abuse, the amounts involved, the sentence imposed. It captures Eduardo's cooperation and his acknowledgement of his role. It captures the forensic handwriting examiner's findings and the notary's identification and the financial audit's conclusions. It does not capture Claire pointing at the cabinet. It does not capture 7 months of a woman in a wheelchair trying to reach her husband through the limited mechanism of a pointing finger and eyes that were completely, furiously, helplessly present. It does not capture the 2 words in shaky left-handed writing. It does not capture the moment I moved the cabinet and found the note and stood in the study understanding what my wife had been trying to tell me. Those things are not in the record. They are in this story. Which is why I am telling it, because the court record is complete as a legal document and incomplete as a human document, and the human document is the one that contains the truth worth carrying forward. She sat by the window. She pointed. She wrote 2 words. She hid them where I would find them. I found them. I did what she was asking. That is the human document. That is the truth that matters most. That is what the record cannot hold. I want to tell you about a specific morning, 8 months after the sentencing, because it is the morning that showed me most clearly what the story had produced and what I was carrying forward from it. I woke at 6, as I always do now. I made coffee in the kitchen where Claire had stood every morning for 30 years. I took the coffee to the study, which I do now on some mornings, to sit at my desk in the early light and think before the day begins. The study had the light that studies with east-facing windows have in the early morning, the specific quality of light that arrives slowly and then all at once, filling the room from one direction, making the furniture cast long shadows that shorten as the hour advances. I sat at the desk. I looked at the chair by the window. The morning light was on it in the way the morning light had always been on it when Claire sat there, which was later in the day than my early mornings but which I have seen in photographs from those years and which is exactly the quality of light I was seeing now. I thought about her sitting there in the months after the stroke. I thought about the pointing, which I could now see clearly as what it was, a woman directing my attention toward the truth with the only instrument available to her, as specific and purposeful as pointing has ever been in any situation in any language. I thought about the note. I thought about 41 years. And I thought about something Claire had said to me, very early in our marriage, in one of those conversations that establishes something important without announcing its own importance. We had been talking about a case she was working on. She had been a young attorney then, still finding the shape of her practice, and she had said something about the clients she found most difficult. She said, "The hardest clients aren't the ones with bad cases. The hardest ones are the ones with good cases they've given up on. The ones who have the truth on their side and have decided that the truth isn't enough." I said, "What do you do with them?" She said, "I tell them that the truth is always enough if you insist on it. It takes longer than it should sometimes. It requires forms of insistence that are inconvenient and costly. But it's enough." She had spent 7 months insisting on the truth from a wheelchair with a pointing finger. She had spent the remaining months hiding a note behind a filing cabinet. She had built toward me for 3 years with letters she did not send and items she noted and attention she sustained through the specific difficulty of not being heard. She had not given up on the truth. She had kept insisting on it in whatever form was available. And eventually, late, at significant cost, in a form she was not alive to witness, the truth had been enough. I sat in the study in the morning light, with my coffee, looking at the chair by the window. The steady father listens. He will always listen now. The truth is always enough if you insist on it. She insisted. He heard. That is the whole of it. That is everything. That is the steady father. Over 41 years of marriage, certain conversations become fixed in a person's memory in the way that certain photographs become fixed, not because they were the most dramatic or the most obviously significant, but because something in them carried the seed of a truth that only became visible later, when the circumstances required it. These are 4 conversations with Claire that I have returned to repeatedly since finding the note, each one revealing, in retrospect, something she had understood and was offering me that I did not fully receive at the time. The first conversation happened in our 2nd year of marriage, when we were both still learning the shape of the life we were building together. We had disagreed about something, I no longer remember exactly what, and I had done what I sometimes did, which was to resolve the disagreement by conceding in a way that left the underlying issue unaddressed. Claire had accepted the concession and then, the following evening, had said, "I want to tell you something about how you handle disagreement." I said, "Go ahead." She said, "When you concede, you do it in a way that sounds like resolution but isn't. You say the words that end the disagreement without changing the position that created it. I think you believe you're being diplomatic. I think what you're actually doing is deferring something that will come back." I was 29 years old and I found this specific and unwelcome. I said, "I think you're describing something that isn't happening." She said, "I know you do. I'm telling you anyway, because I think it matters." She paused. "I'm not asking you to agree with me right now. I'm asking you to keep it." I kept it. I did not act on it for a long time. But I kept it, and over the years I have recognized the pattern she was describing, the concession that ends the conversation without resolving the issue, in my own behavior often enough to confirm that she was accurate in 1981 and has remained accurate since. She was 40 years ahead of me in understanding this about myself. The second conversation was about evidence and assumption, and it happened in the context of a case I was working on in my early years on the bench, though she meant it more broadly. She had asked about a difficult ruling I had made, and I had explained my reasoning, and she had said, "The place where the reasoning is weakest is the place where you assumed rather than investigated." I said, "Which place?" She identified it precisely, a point in the chain of reasoning where I had built on a prior conclusion rather than returning to the evidence. She was right. The ruling held, but the weakness she identified was real, and I knew it was real as soon as she named it. I said, "How did you see that?" She said, "I looked for where the reasoning stopped being grounded in what was actually there and started being grounded in what you'd already decided." She paused. "It's the same place reasoning always gets weak. Where the conclusion precedes the evidence." I applied this on the bench for the next 30 years. I did not apply it to Maria Delgado. The conclusion, 15 years of legitimacy, part of the family, had preceded whatever evidence was accumulating, and I had not seen where the reasoning stopped being grounded in what was actually there. Claire had told me in 1989 where reasoning gets weak. I had not applied it where it most needed to be applied. The third conversation was in 2015, about trust. Our daughter Anna had gone through a difficult period with a friendship that had ended painfully, and Claire had been talking through it with me. She had said something about trust that I have thought about many times in the preceding year. She said, "Trust has to be renewable. It can't be issued once and left to run indefinitely on its own. You give trust and then you check on it. Not suspiciously, you check the way you water a plant. You don't water a plant and then never look at it again. You water it, and you watch it, and when it starts to look wrong you attend to what's wrong." I said, "That sounds exhausting." She said, "It's not exhausting. It's attentive. There's a difference. Exhausting is worrying about everything. Attentive is noticing what's actually there." I had given Maria trust in 2008 and had not watered it. I had not checked on it. I had issued it and left it to run indefinitely on its own for 15 years, and when it started to look wrong, when Claire was pointing at the cabinet, when the accounts were slowly emptying, I had not noticed what was actually there. She had told me in 2015 how to maintain trust correctly. I had not applied it where it most needed to be applied. The fourth conversation was the last significant conversation we had before the stroke. It was a January morning, 3 weeks before the hemorrhage, and we were sitting at the kitchen table after breakfast. Nothing in particular prompted it. She simply said, looking at her coffee, "I want you to promise me something." I said, "What?" She said, "That when I can't tell you something directly, for whatever reason, in whatever circumstances, you'll look for the other ways I'm telling it." I said, "What other ways?" She said, "I don't know yet. Whatever ways are available." She paused. "I've been thinking about getting older and about what it means when communication becomes harder. I don't want you to decide I'm not saying anything because I'm not saying it in the usual form." I said, "Claire, are you worried about something specific?" She said, "No. I'm thinking ahead. I'm asking you to pay attention even when the attention is hard." I said, "I promise." 3 weeks later she had her stroke, and the way she was telling me things changed completely from the usual form, and for 7 months I told her everything was fine. I kept the promise eventually. I found the note. I acted on it. But I kept it 14 months late. She had told me in January, specifically, directly, in the usual form, to pay attention even when the attention was hard. She had told me exactly what she was going to need me to do. She knew. She prepared for it. She asked me to be ready. I am ready now. I will be ready for whatever remains. That is what she left me. That is what I am carrying forward. The steady father listens in whatever form the listening requires. He always will. Maya came back to the house in March, 4 months after the first visit, with a specific purpose that I recognized when she arrived as the purpose of a 12-year-old who has been thinking about something and has decided she is ready to ask about it. She asked, "Grandpa, what was the note like when you found it?" We were in the kitchen. I poured her a glass of juice. I sat down at the table with her and I thought about how to answer a 12-year-old's question about the specific quality of finding 2 words written in shaky left-handed script behind a filing cabinet. I said, "It was very small. Smaller than I expected." The handwriting was hard to read because it was her left hand and she was still learning to use her left hand at that point. Maya said, "Did you cry?" I said, "Yes." She nodded. "What did the note say?" I told her. She sat with it for a moment. 2 words, she said. 2 words, I said. And an arrow. And that was enough? She was not being skeptical, she was genuinely trying to understand. She was 12 years old and she was trying to understand how 2 words could be the thing that broke open a 14-month fraud. It was the starting point, I said. It told me where to look. When I looked, I found what she was pointing at. Maya thought about this. So she couldn't say the whole thing, but she could say enough to tell you where the whole thing was. Exactly, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that has stayed with me since. "That's a kind of trust, isn't it? Leaving you the starting point and trusting that you'd find the rest." I looked at my granddaughter. 12 years old. Claire's eyes. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what it was." She nodded, in the way she nods when she has received an answer that satisfies the question. Then she said, "I think she knew you would." I said, "She knew me very well." "The best," Maya said. "The best." I sat with this for a moment, in the kitchen where Claire had stood every morning, with the granddaughter who had Claire's eyes and the specific directness that comes from people who have paid attention to someone remarkable for the first 12 years of their life and have absorbed something of the quality of that attention. "The best," Maya had said. Yes. She knew me the best of anyone. And she left me 2 words and an arrow and trusted that the knowing was complete enough to do the rest. It was complete enough. The rest got done. That is the steady father. That is everything. She sat beside the window in the light and tried to tell him something he must know. Her hand was good and steady and it pointed at the cabinet and the truth below. He heard her. Eventually he moved the heavy cabinet aside. He found the note she'd written him in waiting. He read it and he wept and then he tried. He tried the way that steady fathers try, not fast, not loud, not with a righteous shout but methodically, with full attention and patience until everything came out. The truth she left was 2 words and an arrow. The trust she left was 41 years deep. The steady father heard her finally, clearly, and kept the promise that he meant to keep. She said, "Pay attention even when it's hard," he said. "I promise." 3 weeks later, stroke 7 months of pointing, "Fine, it's fine," and then, the note and then, "I hear you." That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end. Bench watching justice arrive in its various forms, and I have specific thoughts about the form it took here. Maria was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security federal facility, with the possibility of early release at 18 months contingent on her behavior and the restitution schedule. The sentence was at the lower end of the range available for the charges she faced, which reflected her cooperation with investigators once it became clear that the evidence was comprehensive and that contest would only compound the exposure. Her attorney argued, at sentencing, that she had spent 15 years providing genuine service to our family and that the fraud, while real, needed to be understood in the context of a person who had also provided real value over a long period. The judge, the same judge I had known professionally for a decade, listened to this argument and then said, in her ruling, that the prior legitimate service was relevant to the character assessment but did not mitigate the specific nature of the offense, which had been committed during the period of maximum vulnerability of the family she served and had included the exploitation of a dying woman's diminished capacity to communicate. The exploitation of a dying woman's diminished capacity to communicate. That sentence is in the public record. I read it several times when the written ruling arrived. It is accurate and precise, which is what judicial language is supposed to be, and it captures the specific additional dimension of what had been done that the financial numbers alone do not capture. Claire had not been simply unable to communicate. She had been communicating, with everything available to her, against the specific conditions that Maria's continued presence created. Maria had been in the room redirecting her, taking her hand and suggesting the garden, standing between her and the ability to reach me. That is what the judge's sentence captured. Not just the money. The specific cruelty of committing the fraud in the presence of the person who was trying to report it, and redirecting that person away from the report. I thought about this on the morning the written ruling arrived. I thought about it the way I think about all of the significant things that have accumulated in the year since finding the note, with the specific attention of a man who is no longer looking away from the full picture of what happened and what it means. Justice arrived. Imperfectly, partially, as justice almost always arrives. But it arrived. And it arrived in no small part because Claire had refused to stop insisting on the truth. Because she had pointed and been redirected and had kept pointing. Because she had written the note and hidden it with the specific knowledge of where I would eventually look. Because she had given me the starting point and trusted that I would find the rest. She had been right to trust me. Eventually. The rest got found. The justice arrived. That is enough. It will have to be enough. Our 41st year of marriage was the year of the stroke, January 2021 to January 2022. We had been married 40 years when the hemorrhage happened on a Wednesday morning in January, and we were 3 weeks from our 41st anniversary when it did. We did not celebrate the anniversary that year. We were in the specific suspended reality of the early weeks after the stroke, when the daily medical decisions consume everything and calendar milestones lose their purchase on your attention. I thought about it, on the day itself, I thought about it briefly and then turned back to whatever the specific demand of the morning was. I have thought about it many times since, in the way you think about things you let pass in the press of difficult circumstances and that you wish you had held more deliberately. The 41st anniversary. 3 weeks after the stroke. We had been married 41 years and I did not do anything particular to mark it because the circumstances made ordinary marking feel insufficient and I could not find what would have been sufficient. What I know now, that I did not know then, is that she had been spending the months before the stroke paying attention to Maria. She had been building the record. She had been preparing, in the way that people who anticipate difficulty prepare, for the specific contingency she was worried about. She was worrying about Maria and preparing the record in the months that included our 40th anniversary. She was worried and she was preparing and she was also, on ordinary evenings, sitting at the kitchen table drinking her coffee and gardening on Saturday afternoons and sleeping in the bed we had shared for 40 years. She was carrying the worry quietly, the way she carried difficult things, without burden, without performance, without requiring anyone to help her carry it. She had mentioned it once in the summer, the evening conversation about the letter opener and the scarf, and when I had not been ready to receive it she had returned to watching and building the record alone. She was doing this in the 41st year of our marriage. I did not know it at the time. I know it now. I sit with the full picture of that year, the stroke, the months of recovery and decline, the 7 months of pointing, the months I said everything is fine, and I hold it alongside the knowledge of what she was doing before the stroke and what she was trying to tell me after it, and the picture of her that emerges from the full year is the most complete picture of who she was that I have. She was worried. She was building the record. She was being a wife in the ordinary ways of a 41-year marriage: coffee, garden, Saturday afternoons, bed. She had a stroke. She lost the language. She kept trying. She wrote a note. She hid it. She was the same person through all of it. Attending. Building. Insisting on the truth. That is the 41st year. That is the most important year of our marriage, the one in which everything she had built over 40 years was most completely visible, and the one in which I was least able to see it clearly. I see it clearly now. I am grateful for the seeing, at whatever cost the seeing required. 8 months ago I had a specific morning that I want to tell you about, because it was the morning I understood that the story had concluded not in the courtroom or at the sentencing or at any of the formal moments of the legal process, but here, in the study, with the light coming through the east-facing window. I had woken early, as I always do now. I had made coffee. I had come to the study with it and sat at the desk and looked at the chair by the window in the morning light. I had been doing this for some months. The routine of sitting in the study in the early morning had developed gradually, in the way that routines develop when you need a specific kind of time and the time becomes available. I sat at the desk. I looked at the chair. I thought about Claire and about the case and about what remained and what had been restored and what could not be restored. On this particular morning, I had the specific thought that I want to tell you about. I thought, she did not give up. Not on me, not on the truth, not on the communication that was available to her even when the mechanism was almost entirely gone. She did not give up when I told her everything was fine. She did not give up when Maria redirected her to the garden. She did not give up when 7 months of pointing produced nothing visible. She adapted. She found another form. She wrote it down. She did not give up. And sitting at my desk in the morning light, looking at the chair by the window, I understood that the specific quality of not giving up was the thing she had been modeling for me for 41 years. Not in dramatic or visible ways. In the ordinary, consistent, unglamorous form of a person who attends to the things that matter and continues attending when the attending is difficult, because the alternative to attending is the specific expensive consequence of not attending that she had spent her career watching people pay. She did not give up on the truth. She had never given up on the truth. And she had been trying to teach me this, the way she taught everything, not through instruction but through example and through the consistent quality of her presence in every situation she encountered. I absorbed it. Eventually. She did not give up on my absorbing it either. The steady father attends. He will always attend now. He sits in the study in the early morning with his coffee and he looks at the chair by the window and he thinks about the woman who sat there and pointed at the truth with everything she had available, and he is grateful for the pointing and for the note and for 41 years of a person who believed the truth was always enough if you insist on it. She insisted. He heard. That is everything. That is the whole of it. That is the steady father. Going forward. Carrying what she left. She sat by the window and she pointed. He looked. He will always look. The filing cabinet is on the opposite wall now. I moved it when I reorganized the study, on the same Thursday afternoon when I found the note behind it. It has been on the opposite wall for 8 months and I have not moved it back, because where it was is where the note was, and the note is in the drawer, and the drawer is where it belongs, and the cabinet belongs on the opposite wall where Claire's chair used to be across from it, as it was when she could walk and stand and pull files herself. Before the stroke, she came into the study sometimes on evenings when she was working on something and needed a document from the cabinet. She would cross the room, pull open the appropriate drawer, find what she was looking for with the specific efficient attention she brought to any search, and return to where she had been. This happened unremarkably, dozens of times over the years, in the way that ordinary domestic moments happen, without drama, without the knowledge that they are being observed or remembered, as simply the texture of a shared daily life. I remember it now. I did not particularly notice it then, because it was ordinary, because ordinary things are not noticed in the moment they are occurring, they are available in memory later, when you have a reason to retrieve them. I have a reason to retrieve them. I retrieve this one, Claire crossing the room, finding the document, returning, because it is part of understanding what she saw from the chair by the window. She knew the filing cabinet. She had spent decades crossing the room to reach it. She knew what it held and how it was organized and what should and should not be in it, with the specific, accumulated knowledge of someone who has given consistent attention to a space they inhabit. When she sat in the wheelchair and could no longer cross the room, she could still see the cabinet from the window. She could still see Maria moving things in and out of it. She could still see, with the attorney's eye, that the stroke had not damaged. When something was wrong in the space she could no longer physically navigate. She saw it. She pointed. The cabinet is on the opposite wall now. The chair is by the window. Between them is the room, and in the room is the space where Claire's understanding of what was wrong crossed the space between seeing and being heard. It took 7 months of pointing and a hidden note and a Thursday afternoon in September. But the crossing happened. The understanding arrived. The steady father crosses the room now, to the cabinet on the opposite wall, when he needs a document. He finds it with something less than her specific efficiency and rather more attention than he used to give to such things. He looks at what is there. He always looks now. That is what remains. That is what she left. Going forward. Carrying what she left. She found a way. He heard it. That is everything. She was the most careful reader of documents he had ever known. She had read documents for 38 years as a civil rights attorney, applying the same full honest attention to every paper that passed through her hands, and she had applied the same attention to the papers in their filing cabinet, and she had applied it to the way Maria moved through their house, and she had applied it to the growing wrongness that she identified in 2019 and tried to tell him about once and then began building the record about in the letters she wrote and did not send. She had applied it with the full intelligence and attention that the stroke had not damaged, from the chair by the window, for 7 months. And she had adapted when the pointing was not enough, and she had written 2 words with her left hand and hidden them behind the cabinet where he would find them when he moved it, and she had trusted him to move it eventually because she had known him for 41 years and she knew that he was the kind of man who would eventually reorganize the study. She was right. He moved the cabinet. He found the note. He read 2 words. He understood 40 years of who she was in 2 words written with the left hand. The truth is always enough if you insist on it. She insisted for 41 years and for 7 months from a wheelchair and for the length of time it takes to write 2 words with a hand that is still learning. He heard it. He always will. That is the steady father. That is everything. I want to tell you what I carry, specifically, from this story, because the people watching this channel deserve the honest accounting of what a man takes from a year like the one I have described, and not the general wisdom that sounds like it was extracted from difficulty without actually having been in it. I carry the note. Not metaphorically, I carry it literally, in the drawer of the desk in the study, folded the way it was folded when I found it, in Claire's specific and unmistakable left-hand writing. I look at it sometimes. Not daily, occasionally, when I need the specific reminder of what she was doing and how she was doing it and what it cost her and what it produced. I carry the knowledge that the conclusion formed from past evidence requires openness to current evidence. This is something I knew professionally for 43 years and did not apply personally when it most needed to be applied. I carry this not as self-punishment but as a standing instruction: check the current evidence. Always check the current evidence. The trust that was earned in year 1 requires checking in year 15. I carry the 4 conversations. The one about the form of not hearing. The one about where reasoning gets weak. The one about trust needing to be renewable. The one about paying attention even when the form is not the usual one. She gave me these over 4 decades and I received them partially, and I am receiving them more completely now, with the full context of everything that happened, and what they add up to is a description of how to pay attention that is more specific and more useful than anything I read on the subject in 43 years of professional work. I carry the specific image of Sarah Kwan's observation, that when Maria was in the room, the pointing became more urgent. That the chair by the window was Claire directing my attention toward what was wrong, in the form available to her, and that what was wrong was in the room with us every time she pointed and I told her everything was fine. I carry the gratitude. This is the thing that most people do not expect to find in a story like this, but I carry genuine, specific gratitude for the note and for the 41 years and for the 4 conversations and for the fact that Claire spent 22 months of the worst possible circumstances trying to reach me with the most important thing she had to say, and that she found a way. She found a way. That is what I carry most. That she was the kind of person who found a way. I carry it forward. I apply it in the ways available to me, in the morning routine, in the attention to the financial accounts, in the rental deposit on the 14th of every month, in the chair that stays by the window. That is what I carry. That is what I am going forward with. The steady father carries what she left him. He will for the rest of whatever time remains. She said it in 1983, the year Anna was born, about a case she had lost that she believed she should have won, a civil rights case in which the truth had been present in the record and had not been sufficient to produce the right outcome. She had been devastated by the loss in the specific, silent way she was devastated by things, and after a week of processing it she had said, at the kitchen table, I need to revise something I believed. I said, what? She said, I used to think the truth was always enough if you insisted on it. I still think the truth is enough. But I've learned that the insistence has to take the right form. You can have the truth and insist on it in the wrong form and lose. I said, what's the right form? She said, whatever form reaches the person who needs to be reached. You don't get to insist on the form you prefer. You insist in whatever form is available that works. She had been telling me this in 1983. She did not stop. That is the whole of it. She did not stop trying to reach him when the words were gone. She adapted. She pointed. She wrote. She hid. She trusted. She had done this across 41 years, finding the right form for reaching him specifically, calibrating to the specific way he received things, being patient when the receipt was slow and more patient when the receipt required a medium she could barely access. She had known him long enough to know that the cabinet note would work when the pointing had not, that a man trained to read documents would respond to a document, that 2 words and an arrow in shaky left-hand writing would carry the authority that 7 months of pointing could not, that he would move the cabinet eventually and find it. She knew him that well. She had spent 41 years developing that knowledge and she applied it from a wheelchair in the last months of her life and it worked and justice arrived and what was taken was restored and what cannot be restored is carried with the full attention of a man who understands now, completely, what she was doing for him all along. The truth is always enough if you insist on it. She insisted. He heard. The steady father hears her still. In the October light. In the chair by the window. In the note in the drawer. In the deposit on the 14th. In everything she left. In everything he carries. In everything he will carry going forward. That is the steady father. That is all of it. That is enough. Going forward now. Carrying what she left. She was right. She was always right. And now, finally, completely, at whatever cost the learning required, so is he. Thomas Brennan was a federal judge for 23 years before he retired, and in those 23 years he read tens of thousands of documents, briefs and motions and appeals and evidence packages and victim impact statements and sentencing memoranda and every variety of paper that passes through a federal courtroom in the specific, continuous, unglamorous flow of the work of justice. He had read all of it with the sustained and honest attention that the job required, applying to each document the same quality of notice that Claire had been applying to everything in her life for 67 years. He had read documents for 23 years. He had not read the current evidence of the specific document that mattered most, the one being produced, day by day, in the files and the accounts and the pointing finger of the woman in the wheelchair by the window. He reads it now. He will always read it now. The chair is by the window and the cabinet is on the opposite wall and the note is in the drawer and the deposit comes in on the 14th and he walks in October light and the roses that Claire planted are still growing and the grandchildren visit on Saturdays and Maya has Claire's eyes and asked the right questions and he told her the truth, which is that Claire was the smartest person he ever knew and that the note was 2 words and an arrow and that it was enough and that she knew it would be enough because she knew him and had known him for 41 years and that is the whole of it and it is enough and he is carrying it forward and the steady father is going forward now and that is the steady father and that is everything and that is the end. The morning routine holds. 6 o'clock. Coffee. The walk. The study. The chair by the window in the early light. The accounts checked with the specific attention of a man who has learned that the things that matter require his direct attention and not a delegate's attention regardless of how trustworthy the delegate appears to be. The filing cabinet on the opposite wall, accessible, its contents organized and monitored, nothing moved without his knowledge. The rental deposit on the 14th, received and noted and filed in the property records section where it has been filed for 35 years, where Claire filed it before him and where he will file it after her for whatever years remain. The note in the drawer, looked at sometimes, not often, the 2 words that said everything she needed to say in the form that could reach him, the arrow that pointed at the truth she had been trying to reach him with for years. He is reached. He is carrying it. He is going forward with everything she gave him, including and especially the thing she gave him last, from the chair by the window, in the shaky left-hand writing of a woman who had spent 41 years learning how to reach the specific person she was married to and who had found, at the very end, the form that worked. 2 words. An arrow. The truth. Enough. Always enough. The steady father knows this now. He will always know it. Going forward. That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end. She sat by the window in the chair and pointed at the truth for 7 months, and he did not hear her, and she did not stop. She wrote 2 words with the hand she had been learning to use, and she hid them where he would find them, and she was right that he would find them, and right that 2 words would be enough for a man trained to receive evidence in written form, and right that the cabinet would eventually be moved, and right about Maria, and right about everything as she had been right about everything for 41 years. He heard her eventually. He acted on what he heard. He is carrying it forward in every morning and every walk and every deposit and every check of the accounts, and every time he looks at the chair by the window and thinks about the woman who sat there and refused to give up on reaching him. She had applied it in 2022, when the form of direct verbal communication was not available, by insisting in the forms that were available, pointing, note writing, the specific placement of the note where the right form of reaching me was the physical act of moving a filing cabinet. The truth is always enough. The insistence has to take the right form. Whatever form reaches the person who needs to be reached. She had needed to reach a man who was a federal judge, trained to respond to documented evidence rather than to verbal claims, trained to find the thing in the filing cabinet, trained to understand that 2 words in writing carry a specific authority that 7 months of pointing does not. She had known this about me. She had calibrated to it. She had found the form that would reach me. The truth was enough. She insisted in the right form. He was reached. That is the whole of the story. The truth is always enough if you insist on it in the right form for the right person. She knew the right person and the right form. He is carrying it forward. The steady father carries the truth in whatever form it needs to take. He always will. That is everything. That is the steady father. The autumn after the sentencing was the first autumn in 3 years that did not carry the specific weight of the autumn before it. The autumn of the stroke. The autumn of the first months without her. This autumn was different, not lighter exactly, but different in quality, the way that grief shifts over time from the acute to the sustained, from the thing that stops you to the thing that accompanies you. I walked in the neighborhood every morning in October, which I had not done consistently before and which I do now as part of the morning routine that has become the structure of the days. The neighborhood in October is the specific combination of things that October neighborhoods are: the light lower and more golden, the leaves beginning their turn, the air with the first real coldness in it after the long warmth of summer. Claire had loved October. She had loved it for the specific quality of its light, which she described as honest in a way that other months were not. Neither the tentative light of spring nor the insistent light of summer, but the direct, clear light of a season that knows what it is and does not pretend otherwise. I walked in October's honest light and I thought about what the year had been and what I was carrying forward from it, and I found that what I was carrying was not primarily the fraud or the legal process or the specific details of what had been done and undone. What I was carrying was the note. 2 words. The arrow. The understanding that arrived when I moved the cabinet. She had found a way. The autumn continued. The leaves fell. The winter came and went and the spring arrived and then the summer and then another October, the second one since the sentencing, and I was still walking in the mornings and still checking the rental deposit on the 14th and still sitting in the study in the early light with the chair by the window and the cabinet on the opposite wall and the note in the drawer. I am still learning what she left me. I expect to be learning it for a long time. The truth is always enough if you insist on it. She insisted. He heard. He is carrying it forward. That is the steady thing. That is what holds. The steady father walks in October light. He checks the accounts. He tends the things that need tending. He sits in the study with the chair by the window and the note in the drawer and the full attention he has been developing for 83 years of trying to learn what his wife spent 41 years modeling for him. He reads the current evidence. He does not let the conclusion of year 1 stand unchallenged in year 15. He listens in whatever form the listening requires. He insists on the truth in whatever form the insisting requires. He is going forward with everything she left him, which is more than he understood when she was alive and more than he can fully account for now, and which he expects to keep discovering the full dimensions of for whatever time remains. That is the steady father. That is everything. He sat by the window once and pointed. He heard her eventually. He always will. Going forward. Carrying what she left. That is the end. That is the steady father. That is everything, and it is enough, and it will always be enough because she made sure of it, and she was right about everything as she always was, and the truth is always enough, and he knows it now, and the chair is by the window, and the note is in the drawer, and the deposit comes in on the 14th, and he walks in October light, and he is still learning, and he will always be learning, and that is the steady thing, and that is everything, and that is the steady father, and that is the end. The steady father is reached. He will always be reached now. He will always listen in whatever form the listening requires. The truth is always enough if you insist on it. She insisted. He heard. Going forward, carrying what she left. Chair by the window. Note in the drawer. Deposit on the 14th. October light. The steady father is going forward now. That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end and the beginning of the going forward, and the whole of what matters, and the whole of what remains, and the whole of what she left, and the whole of what he carries. That is enough. That will always be enough. She made it enough. She was right. The steady father knows it. The end. She had been a civil rights attorney for 38 years, and before that she had been a law student, and before that she had been an undergraduate who had decided that the law was the most direct mechanism available for requiring the truth to be honored in specific and enforceable ways. She had spent her life working within that mechanism, and she had brought the same quality of attention to everything else in her life, to the marriage, to the children, to the house, to the filing cabinet, to the 15 years of Maria's presence in their home, to the wrongness that began to accumulate in 2019, to the pointing that she maintained for 7 months from a wheelchair, to the note she wrote and hid and trusted him to find. She had brought the same quality of attention to all of it, and the quality had not diminished when the stroke made the expression of it harder. It had simply changed form. The attention was the same. The love was the same. The insistence was the same. Only the mechanism changed, and she adapted, and she found the mechanism that could reach him, and she used it, and it worked, and the truth arrived, and justice followed, and the steady father is going forward now with the full weight of what she left him, which is heavier and more valuable than anything Maria tried to take. That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end. The rental property generates income on the 14th of every month. The chair is by the window. The note is in the drawer. The roses are growing. The grandchildren visit. October light comes through the east window of the study. The steady father attends to all of it every morning with the quality of attention his wife spent 41 years developing in him. He was slow. She was patient. The math worked out. That is enough. That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end.